You know, if somebody walked up to you, maybe down at the plaza in Apollo, and asked you the simple question, what's the message of the cross? How would you explain that to somebody? Somebody who maybe's never been in church, somebody who doesn't really have any strong religious or Christian ties. What would you say to that person who is inquiring of you what the cross is all about? What was accomplished with this thing called the cross that you see on walls of churches and being displayed as jewelry around people's necks? And I think sometimes we who have been in the church for a long time all of a sudden move into this way of using a lot of theological words to try to explain what was going on the cross. And while many of those are accurate and appropriate, they probably don't communicate to the average guy on the street who's never really been to church what the cross of Jesus Christ is all about. I mean, words that are familiar to us who go to church every Sunday, words like redemption and salvation and sanctification and substitution and regeneration, those are words that carry no specific meaning to a person who's never been in church or a person who doesn't really know a whole lot about God. So what then could we use to really express what the cross of Jesus is all about? What is it that really describes in total detail the message of the cross for men and women who live today? Well, I think Jesus wonderfully answered that question for us. And it would be somewhat foolish to try to improve upon his words. The way that we could express what the cross of Jesus Christ is all about is simply in the words that when Jesus was nailed to the cross and was dying, he cried out with the words we just read a moment ago, "Father, forgive them." See, the cross is all about forgiveness. That's what Calvary's trying to say. That's what God's trying to speak into this world in which we live. It's something that every one of us need to experience and something that we need to live out in our lives. Forgiveness is love in action. Jesus, for 3 years in his public ministry, taught his disciples that they were to love their enemies. And now, hanging on the cross, he was practicing what he had taught them. Jesus had told his disciples to turn the other cheek when people treated them poorly or was unkind or unbecoming to them. And with blood running down his cheeks, he forgave those who despitefully was using him. Had Jesus done anything else on the cross? Had he done anything to kind of get out of what he was dealing with on the cross, would have really negated all of the teaching that he had done throughout his ministry. You know, we're told that Jesus, the God-man, could have called 10,000 angels to come and rescue him and get him out of that situation. But he chose not to do that. What did he choose to do? He chose to look at all of those people that were in front of him. Some were followers, many of them were haters. And he looked at him and said, "Father, forgive them." That's what the message of the cross is all about. It's about forgiveness. It's about you knowing the forgiveness of God, and it's also about you practicing forgiveness in your relationships with other people. Oh, it's a wonderful thing to know that God has forgiven us. But oftentimes we trip over the fact that we have to forgive other people. That we have to be willing to go the extra mile to be able to take that while we were yet sinners, that God would love us and forgive us. And then we won't forgive somebody else. We won't take the time to extend that wonderful act of love to another person when God wonderfully did that for us. See, I think the message of the cross is not just a message we receive on Sunday morning in a church sanctuary, but it's a message that we live out day after day after day. That God so loved us that he was willing to send his Son to be our Savior, to die for our sins. Jesus taught that message, but he then practiced that message. And I wonder sometimes we who call ourselves followers of Christ, who call ourselves Christians, are we practicing the message? If we have experienced the message, is that message then lived out in our lives? The message of Calvary is forgiveness. I think every person understands what forgiveness is. Do you remember when you were a kid and you did something wrong? You'd say, "I'm sorry, forgive me." When we got a little bit older, sometimes in our youth, we'd do some stupid things, wouldn't we? And we had to ask for forgiveness, hoping that who we ask it of, be it parents or be it against somebody else, they would forgive us. But then it seems like sometimes as we get a little bit older in life and we get into other relationships, all of a sudden our asking for and extending and receiving forgiveness diminishes. And we live in such a broken world with a lot of people that have something against somebody else, or somebody did something to slight them somewhere along the way, and they say, "I can't forgive that person." What if God looked at your life and said, "I couldn't forgive them"? We'd be eternally lost, wouldn't we? So while we were yet sinners, God loved us, gave himself for us through Jesus dying upon the cross so that we might have forgiveness. How much more then we who have been forgiven should extend that forgiveness toward others. You see, we can tell people what the cross is all about. The meaning of the cross is forgiveness, but you know, people will listen more intently when we live out the message of the cross. When it's so affected our minds and our hearts and our style of life, that's when the message of the cross takes on great meaning. You know, we might never understand theologically the depths of depravity or reconciliation, but we do understand what it means to do something wrong and to ask for forgiveness and receive that forgiveness. We all know what that's like. And I just want to tell you this morning, that's what the cross is all about. That anything and everything we've ever done wrong, we can experience forgiveness for those things when we ask God for it. And not just for us who sit in pews on Sunday morning in a church, but any person anywhere who calls upon the name of the Lord can be forgiven. That's what the cross is all about. God says to us through the cross that man could do his utmost in sin and God would do his utmost in forgiveness. That there is no sin that ever could be committed that's beyond the forgiveness of God, except that sin where we don't recognize we need God. And so forgiveness is not an old-fashioned component. It's a very much needed factor in the world in which we live. When you think about Jesus dying upon the cross, we think about a body nailed to a wooden tree, but do you understand that when the cross of Jesus Christ was there at Calvary, encompassing that cross were things like greed and lies and selfishness and unfaithfulness and blasphemy and sacrilegious words that have been used and cheating and physical and mental cruelty. In fact, every form of human vice was there at the cross of Calvary. And through all of that muck and mire, Jesus looks down and he says, "Father, forgive them." He looks down upon us today and he says, "Father, forgive them." Jesus came with a mission to seek and to save those who were lost. And if we can today give thanks to God that he has rescued us and found us, what a marvelous testimony that is. But we dare not forget he came to seek and to save all people who were lost. Even people that maybe we struggle with or have a problem with or we don't even really like. Do you understand that his forgiveness is also extended to them. And maybe, just maybe, he would use you to demonstrate what forgiveness is all about. See, our personal message from the cross really needs to be in those words that Jesus said, Father, forgive them. When we take a good look at ourselves, we see, you know what, we're flawed. We're sinful. We've missed the mark. We've come short of the glory of God. We're guilty before God of wrongdoing, of sins. Part of our nature as human beings. But when we recognize that we're estranged from God, we also discover God sent a bridge to get us over the chasm between us and God. And that bridge is the cross of Jesus Christ that forgives us. Forgiveness is the way we walk from the world and walk to God. That's what the message of the cross is all about. You know, our needs, they're many. We have physical needs, we have emotional needs, we have social needs, we have financial needs, we have spiritual needs. But one of the things that we can discover when we meet God through the cross of Jesus Christ, He can supply all of our needs according to His riches in glory. See, the cross is about God and us intersecting together. In our own way, we've walked away from God. I've met a lot of people who in their life decided God wasn't really important, and so they went after the things that this world offered. They got a lot of possessions. They had a lot of things. I've been with people when they've come down to the end of their life that said they'd give up every possession they had if they could have their family back, or if they could right a wrong. I've never seen a person on their deathbed start calculating all that they had in possessions. But it's in that moment that they calculate what kind of love, what kind of relationships they've had. And so I say to you this morning, the cross of Jesus Christ is about a relationship. It's about a relationship with God that changes us from the inside out. And it's about a relationship that we have with other people, that if God could forgive us, He could use us to help in the forgiveness of others. That if they can see Christ alive and living within us, what a marvelous testimony that is to what the cross is all about. I think the greatest gift that a person can receive is that love of Christ in forgiveness. And I think one of the greatest gifts that we can offer to other people, and sometimes, friends, it begins right in our own families. Do we have any forgiveness issues in our families? Do we have any forgiveness issues in our friends? You know, I've talked with people as a pastor, and sometimes something's gone wrong and they've broken off a relationship and they just let it fester. They let it grow. They never look for a way to find resolution. So many people walk around hurt and bruised and unforgiving. Today, remember that while you were yet a sinner, God forgave you. And He calls us to be His instruments of forgiveness in this world. If He could forgive us, don't you think that through His power that is at work within us, we might come to the place that we forgive others? See, the message of Calvary is not only extended to us, it lives out through us. Father, forgive them. We forgive because God first forgave us. We love others because God first loved us. When we know the depth of forgiveness, we're willing to extend that forgiveness because Christ lives in us. And He causes us to take those steps that maybe we feel at times uncomfortable with or uneasy with. But when we pause and remember that He was willing to go to the cross and die for us and bring forgiveness for us, He wants to bring forgiveness to all who will call upon His name. So may we who are forgiven understand that the real message of the cross on this World Communion Sunday is all about forgiveness. And with God's help, may we demonstrate the forgiveness we have received by the way we relate toward other people. That's living out the message of the cross, forgiveness.